Welcome back to another episode of Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. This is one of your hosts, Russell Bruce, and today we come back at you again with another special episode. And today we're going to talk about the infamous King James, the one that most of us, we know about the King James Version of the Bible. It's probably the most read Bible version in the world, definitely in the United States. But many people outside of that don't know too much about King James. Myself, like others, heard a lot of the rumors that he was a homosexual king and all kind of other stuff. But when you dig into the records and you start looking at a lot of these books, there's a lot more to that story. So um, either one, it was to deter you from digging deeper, um, or also you see a situation in, I think it's in the Apocrypha King James Version of the Bible from like 1611. He actually had a beef with the Pope and referred to him as the Antichrist at one point because of the interpretation and the stance that the Pope had standing in as the victor of Christ. Uh, but what we're going to do today is to look at a different aspect of who King James is, right? Or was, and how it relates, or why I'm even interested, or why you should even be interested into his history. Because if you look at the history of the United States, especially the 13 colonies, when we look back in the 1600s, King James was the one that really kicked it off. So King James was a Scottish king, but most of us know about him being King James the First of England. But simultaneously, he was King James the Sixth of Scotland. And many people reading through books or records may think that these are two different people, but it was the same person. And a lot of times you see these names were passed down, so it does get a little confusing if you really don't understand the timelines or dig into the history. But this guy played a major role in the United States becoming the United States. And we're going to dig into a little bit of this today. So let me share my screen and we could jump into it. Once again, this is going to be King James the Sixth of Scotland, King James the First of England. And here's pictures that a lot of you may see floating around on TikTok, and they're talking about King James being black. Well, these pictures have some validity to them. And down here, this is actually his father, Lord Darnley. But and you see also he looks like a black man. This guy looks like most people's uncle that shows up at the family reunion here in the United States. And he's eating some collard greens and some macaroni and cheese and cornbread with the rest of us. But what we're going to do first, I have Curry Mayo. Once again, I like to dig into some of his. Instead of reinventing the wheel, this guy does a good job of showing a lot of the sources, right? He inspired me, as well as legendary Top Cat, who was actually out there killing it. So big shout out to legendary Top Cat, in his university, Big Chief University. Also, another person that puts out a lot of information on this topic is Rhonda Johnson. Her YouTube channel's Truth Uncompromised. And I have another gentleman that I'm gonna queue up some of his stuff here shortly, and it's Neophyte Dag. But there's many others, but for this particular topic, these people are people that I've referenced. So I just want to give them a shout out. So let's jump right into it.
These books by Lee Cummings. A lot of you've seen his books, The Negro Question, and there's like about 6, 7, 8 parts. The world history that is being taught in the classrooms will make the existence of the Black Scots, Black Irish, Black Brits, Black Italians, Black French or Black Europeans that were sold directly into the American slave plantations. Again, what I've been saying, who was really coming in over here in ships by the thousands and thousands and thousands? That was Europeans, both Black and pale skinned Europeans, not just Black, all right, but also not just white. So it says here the Scottish kings of England. All right, so here he has a picture of King James. All right. All right, so this is an image he has here of King James. All right, so he got a little curly hair and stuff. So they're showing here. So James, by the grace of God, King of England. All right. He says, I know that this image of a black King James can be a little confusing because of your Western education, but this is the truth that is known by the rich and the elite in the world. That was the reason I paraded all of the English historians and professors before I got into the bowels of this book. I have to get your mind ready to receive the truth. King James came from a long line of black Scottish Stuart kings, the Stuarts. 343 years of rulership in Scotland. The Stuarts not only ruled in Scotland, they ruled France, Spain, and Ireland, and England, Britain, and Wales. King James was able to rule all these lands because of all these people were of Iberian black descent. All right, so were all they from Iberian, or did some of them come from Atlantis or America? All right, they were the same people. If you look at the ball in his hand, it represents world rulership, and there was only one other group of world leaders who used this type of symbolism, and they were the Byzantine Roman emperors. Remember, they told the English that they were Roman citizens. This is the proof. All right, so he's saying these Britons have something to do with the Edomians or Edomites. So this is one of the signs of scholarship when you're able to read the symbolism of images. In my research, I found out that the ancient Scottish was a tribe from northeastern Ireland, which means the Scots are really Irish. So if I have seen an ancient Scot, I have seen an ancient Irishman. And if I have seen an ancient Irishman, then I have seen an ancient Briton. All right, it says here, chapter 3, Oliver Cromwell. It says history records that after the execution of Charles I of Scotland and England, that Oliver Cromwell invaded Scotland, killed 4,000 men and took 10,000 captives. For some inexplicable reason, it took Cromwell 1 year to end the war in Scotland. What I do know, and I am certain of, is that he deported the Scots to American colonies. These black Europeans were sent to Barbados, Boston, Charlestown, Cambridge, Concord, Hingham, Ipswich, Virginia, Newark, and the southern plantations. All right, we got this again, the primary sources of this real history on my previous videos of white servitude and black masters. Check it out, there's 4 parts so far. These are the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, these Scottish blacks are among us in the Americas, and we are ignorant of their existence as well as they are. Listen to what he's saying. It has been reported that in the African American community, so-called African American, right, a lot of blacks have Scottish and Irish last names.
All right, so that was a good introduction right there. So he mentions that a lot of so-called African Americans carry these Irish and Scottish last names. I myself, Bruce, right? One of the famous Jacobite kings in Scotland was Robert the Bruce, who was an ancestor of King James. So they all are like a long line of family. You hear how most of these presidents here in the United States, they say are related. But once you understand this, all of it is start to make sense, right? Because these bloodlines, in many cases, you'll start to see they were marrying first cousins. In some cases, they tried to marry their brother and sister. But and it runs pretty deep. But getting back to the part about the last names, like Bruce is a Scottish name. And you know, I have friends with the last name Scott. That's an Irish name. So you have plenty of these people who have these names. Like I have cousins who are Stuarts. And when you look, the places that he mentioned that they were being transported to, like say, for example, the most noted is Virginia, right? But also into the Carolinas and to Barbados and Jamaica. So you see tons of people with these Irish names. Now, going back, and if you study the slave trade, once again, it was the Spanish It was the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the French who started off the slave trade. So this part about people having names of their slave masters, the slave masters weren't the Scots. They were the ones that were being exiled and shipped out into these colonies. And once again, they were actually established by King James, his son King Charles, his grandson King Charles II, also King George, who was a German king, and they were actually related. It was all family bloodlines. So this is it gets pretty deep. But let's continue.
Very interesting book because it correlates with what we've been learning. All right, and again, we're not here to like basically try to debate. We're not trying to debate what we already know to be true. We're not trying to debate. People want to be stuck in a story, right? Like in storyline, we're never showing sources, never, or if their personal history is that, you know, that's their personal history. That doesn't mean everybody else's history is that, you know. So you know, come with respect. We're not here to play games and be sarcastic or anything. We're here to build and learn. And you know, if you want to present some sources, you know, you're free to do your own video so we can look at the information and verify it ourselves with the sources that you present, you know, so we could see if it's you know, legit or what it is, if it's just, you know, fairy tales or what, you know. But yeah, well, we just, you know, always got to talk sources. Now, I got this book right here. All right, it's called The Jacobite Gleanings from State Manuscripts, Short Sketches of Jacobite, The Transportations in 1745 by J. Macbeth Forbes.
All right. And before he jumps into this, I just wanted to let you guys know you could actually find this PDF for free out there if you just Google and you put in the title Jacobite's Gleaning or put in the transportation in 1745, put PDF either on the front or the back, and you'll find that there's an archive copy out there. You might find one that's an abbreviated version that might only be, say, 10, 20 pages or whatever, but this whole book is out there. And he goes into some details. I actually use it on several of my podcasts and may show you something else again in there today. But there were two transportations of these Jacobite rebels who were trying to put the King James Stuart bloodline back on the throne once they had been dethroned. And they referred to them as the Jacobites because King James referred to himself as Jacobus or Jacob, right? But you got to think once again, the letter J, you have to find out when that actually came into fruition. So there were different variations of the particular word in the spelling.
All right, I actually have the passenger list, the ship list for 1745 of the Jacobites. All right, and there's something very interesting in here. All right, this is from the Harvard College Library from the bequest of Thomas Wren Ward. All right, and again, when we're talking about these people right here, we ain't talking about Africans. It says the Jacobite Gleanings from State Manuscripts, Short Sketches of Jacobite, the Transportations in 1745 by J. Macbeth. An exact list and description of 150 rebel prisoners shipped at Liverpool on board the veteran John Rickey, master for the Leeward Islands, which were taken near Antigua the 28th June last by the diamond privateer Paul Marcelli, commander, and carried into Martinico the 30th June of 1747. All right, what are we going to see here? The passenger list of all these prisoners, Jacobites. Now let's see, it says name, age, profession, the county, the stature, remarks, so any other thing, right? And number one, just for example, we're going to start with number one. It says Robert Adam, 18. He was 18. He was a laborer. County, he's from Sterling. He was 5 feet 1 inch, very short. He's brown. He's brown, smooth face, right? He's brown. All right, he's brown. William Bell, 46 Weaver, Berwick, 5'4". He's black with curled hair. He's strong made. All right. Douglas, Dougal, or Dougal. We already know about Dougal. Dougal Campbell, servant, Lockaber, 5'4". He's also brown complexion, well made and ruddy, brown complexion. Alex Katana, 17. All right, young. These are young. Miller, Bandana. All right, he's from Bandana. He's 5'5". He's black, ruddy, black, ruddy. All right. A lot of you probably still saying, well, that probably means white. Well, we'll see. All right, we'll see. Dougal Campbell, Dougal, Douglas, Dougal, Swarthy, right? He's a servant. Argyle. He's 5'5", 1/4. He's brown also. And also ruddy, healthy, well made and ruddy, it says, I guess. Alex Campbell. All right, we already know about the Campbells. We just read that, right? 18. He's a laborer. Iverness, 5'8". He's pot pitted. He's pot pitted, whatever that means. John Campbell, he's 20.
So pot pitted, what that actually means is that they are scarred from smallpox. So either he had smallpox at the time or recently got over it and had scars. So when you see pot pitted, that's what that means. Also, look out for the names. Because this is a good resource. This book is excellent resource if you're doing your genealogy and you happen to get back into this time frame, which most people, if you have ancestors in the Virginia area or say the North Carolina area, and also up in Massachusetts, but for the most part, most of the people that I've done genealogy for is between Virginia and North Carolina that you find descendants of these people that are on this list, right? And let's continue.
And he's 5'2". He's Swarthy. All right, he's Swarthy. There's no saying, oh, well, that black means no, Swarthy. He's Swarthy. Alex Cameroon, he's well made. He's Swarthy because this doo-doo, brown, Swarthy, brown pock picket. Oh, I guess so. These are all brown people. See that? The D.O. is diddle. All right. William Dickinson, red hair, thick set, and healthy. Alex Davidson, he's ruddy and slim made. Andrew Edwards, he's black, well made, strong. All right. Alex Goodbrand. All right. So I want you to see all these people, right? All these people. Look at the names: brown, black, brown, thin, black, brown, ditto, and so on, and so on, and so on. Do you see any of your last names here? These are Jacobites. You understand what a Jacobite is? Huh? This is a long list. I'm trying to tell you. All right? I'm going to show you sign. Donald McGillis, McDonald, McDougal. All right? Muck. We already know what all that means. McDonald, McKee, Daniel McKee, McKee's. Oh, Daniel McKee.
And while you're looking on the screen right now at these names and trying to figure out what's the importance and the connection to King James, it's because King James established the first colony, which was Virginia in the 1600s. And we're going to go over that in a second. But in establishing it, they were bringing in people to, pick the tobacco, to search for gold, silver, etc., right? And that was in the 1600s. So with his son, his King Charles II, his grandson King Charles I, excuse me, is his son. King Charles II, his grandson. By the time they get in, this is continuing, and whoever was in power at the time, whether they were ruling under Catholicism or the Protestants took over, or say they married into a different bloodline that was one or the other, whoever was on the opposite end of the stick normally got sent into servitude during these wars and got sent to the 13 colonies, to the islands, wherever the throne had actually set up these charters. So that's the connection. So this is 1745. They're showing them being shipped out. But it once again, in the introduction, they mention Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell. So that was like in the around 1630, 1650 time frame, somewhere around there, where he had kind of conquered that Scotland area, and he had killed thousands of Scottish people. And by the time those wars were done, with the ones that he shipped out, like over a 10-year period and murdered, he wiped out close to 2/3 of the population, maybe in 10 years. And that's where a lot of these names come from and end up once again in the Carolinas, Virginia, Massachusetts, uh, Barbados, Jamaica. So these people came with these names and they're your ancestors. So later on, we were sold this story that we came from Africa on slave ships, and 100 million of us died, all these different stories. But by the time you get done digging through all these records, you'll start to see that that's not what happened. Matter of fact, that was an impossibility to happen the way that they said it happened. And there's many reasons, and there will be other podcasts following up as to why that didn't happen the way it happened. And there's no proof of it. There's no proof of it. And then there's reasons and time frames and people's names, etc., as to when the story began to shift so that the land can be stolen. Most African American people, you have bloodlines that go throughout the Southeast. That's where our people were located. Like over 90% of our people were in the Southeast, from Virginia through the Carolinas, all the way down through Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, uh, all the way through Texas and Louisiana, Alabama. Mississippi is like the mother, pretty much, of American civilization. There are some geologists that say that the Mississippi Valley was the first land to come up out of the water as the earth was being formed. So that would have been the first place, most likely, where life would have began, like plant life, vegetation, insects, animals, people. Let's continue.
Remember that for a future video. All right, Daniel McKee, the McKees. Who's McKees? What does that have to do with a first person to own what you call it, property and apartments and like project style kind of buildings? Is a McKee. He was a McKee. All right. Now, look at this. It says black, short neck, red hair, black, light hair, well made, fair. So he's fair, right? Brown, thick, black, swarthy, slender. Black, swarthy, slender. So that doesn't mean white, because he can't be white swarthy, right? Black, swarthy, brown, straight, sandy hair, brown, diddle, 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 diddle. Just a reminder, we're here in the American Dictionary of the English language. All right. This is actually Webster's 1828 dictionary. All right, I got the official PDF. We're gonna go all the way to the word Swarthy. All right, and right here it says Swart, right? Almost sounds like Stewart. Swart, Stewart, Swart, Stewart. Is that what they get Stewart? Did it mean black or dark? What is Swart? It says being of dark hue, moderately black, tawny, swarth. All right. Down here it says swart, to make tawny or brown. Swart, an apparition. Swartly, all right, duskly with a tawny hue. It says swartness, tawniness, a dusky or dark complexion, right? Dark complexion, swarthy, being of a dark hue or dusky complexion. Tawny, in warm climates, the complexion of men is universally what? Swarthy or what? Black in warm climates. Is there only warm climates in Africa? No, we have warm climates all over the world, right? The Moors, Spanish, and Italians are more swarthy than the French, Germans, and English. That says their swarthy hosts were dark in all our plains. Swarthy, all right, black, as the swarthy African, it says, right? As the swarthy African. So the African is swarthy, right? Swarthy is a tawny color. Swartish, somewhat dark or tawny. Swarthy, tawny. All right. So you get the picture, right? Swarthy. So now we're gonna Swarthy, right? Black, straight, ditto, Swarthy, lusty. See
Look
all
for your
these last names,
ancestors.
right? See the names. Black, pale faced. There you go. Pale faced. All right. This is pale faced. They tell you fair faced, pale faced. When they're pale faced, they're telling you fair, black, brown, fair complexion, pale. All right. So this, when they're saying black, it doesn't mean white or fair or pale because they're telling you when they're pale, pale complexion again. All right. Fair. Now this could be a light skinned, dark skinned person. It could just be a light skin, but they're telling you straight up, pale complexion, fair. Could be straight up a white person, right? Straight up. Pale, real pale person. Brown, dark complexion, well made. Joseph Brown, dark complexion, well made. Daniel Duff, right? What do we learn about Duff and Dub? All right, dark hair, healthy, brown, sickly, Wow, he don't sound good. Well made, brown complexion, all right. Pale hair, sickly, dark visage, strong, healthy. Pale complexion, all right. This guy's pale, James Mann, all right. And the list continues. There's a long list here. Remember how much they had? Dark complexion, dark. So what is the pattern we're seeing here? If anybody has noticed already, I would ask my daughter, what is the pattern? She would say, well, they're all dark. They're all brown. I'm like, yes, exactly. It's a majority of dark complexion people here, brown complexion, swarthy. As
All right. So once again, that's Corey Mayo, who does an incredible job, like bringing out the resources. And you could do the same thing, ladies and gentlemen. Go out, grab this book. You could get a free copy once again if you just Google um, PDF. This one was Jacobite's Gleanings, or you could type in the 1745 transportation Jacobites. All right, so I'm gonna move forward here, but this is making me want to look at another book here. I want to give you guys these sources so you can go out and grab this information for yourself. From whence, like for example, not only did they come to Virginia and the Carolinas, they were being shipped to Barbados and Jamaica. Ivory, man, ivory. So you have this particular book right here. You could also find, same way I just searched, Whence the Black Irish of Jamaica. So in this book, they talk about Oliver Cromwell in the 1600s, the same thing, shipping these Black Scots out. It was pretty much a genetic cleansing of an ancient bloodline that was still in Europe. Same thing happened in France and in Spain, like, because you got to think about it. How did these people end up in Scotland and in Britain? If you go back and you study world history, especially ancient history, you had the little negrito type all over. That's why you see the heights of most of these people were very short people. And some people, even when they look, say, from these wars, like the American Revolution, where they see an outfit, they're like, why are these guys so tiny? But it was these people, right? You had these short Twa people that inhabited most of the world. And that's where a lot of that ancient European bloodline were from the Twa people And, you had different migrations that took place, like at the end of the Moorish Empire that lasted from 711 to 1492. A lot of the Moors fled from Spain and Italy into France and eventually made their way into Scotland. And you'll hear stories of, but the names change. So it might not say Spain. It'll talk about people from the Iberian Peninsula, which is the same thing, right? But and if you don't know who the Moors are, because you hear these stories, some people have made comments of some of my prior podcasts trying to explain away what dark and swarthy and tawny and all this other stuff, that it meant everything other than them being black. But it's like they're on all of our family trees. If your people are carrying these names and they come from Virginia, North Carolina, when you do your genealogy, which I recommend everybody do, black, white, indifferent, dig through these records, you're going to find a lot of times you're going to see these famous people that you read about in history on your family tree. So it's like you need to know the story of you. And when you research it and you find out for yourself, it's like it kills all the lies because it's your story and they can't take that away from you. And you're using documented government records, you're using death certificates, you're using marriage certificates. You have wills where lands were being deeded. It shows where, maybe the throne like gave land to some of these early pioneers and colonists who came into these 13 colonies. So those are some of the things that you want to look for. And I'm talking and almost forgot what I was looking for. So that's that one. So let's look at Ben Franklin. So during this same time frame, Ben Franklin is, there's an essay, and this is it, 1751, Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind. So this guy he had a concern about not only these Black Scots, but coming into Pennsylvania, it had a whole bunch of what they call Black Dutch, like Germans and so forth, coming into like Philadelphia and Germantown, Pennsylvania. I guess people don't think, why is it that the Virginia, Maryland area was known as like the Chocolate City, and the Carolinas, a lot of melanated people in those particular regions and up in the Philadelphia area. It's because they were bringing these people into the 13 colonies, and most of these founding fathers you're going to find on your tree. So I'm starting to question what they actually look like, because you have to remember the camera wasn't invented supposedly until the 1830s, right? And so these pictures from 1700s, when you see them, it's almost laughable because they pretty much whitewashed everybody of importance to make you think that they were not Black. But when you start reading the books, say from the 1700s, going back before all the racism kicked in, when it became fashionable and the land theft and so forth was taking place, then you start to see the laws and so forth change, and these Black and white statuses pop up, where before they were more just statuses and not racial identifications. So that was one of the reasons why on the that manifest that was showing who the people were, because somebody was getting paid to send them over here to work, and they were coming over as indentured servants because the 13 colonies were still running off the Magna Carta, which forbade slavery. Like, it wasn't supposed to be slaves, so they had indentured servants. So a lot of these people, the Jacobites in particular, that were trying to fight to put the King James bloodline back on the throne, they were being shipped out. Like, a lot of them got killed, some were getting imprisoned for life. And some of them were waiting to be executed. And then after a while, they're like, well, we could send them into the 13 colonies and get them to work and get them to fight. And you'll start to see that a lot of these people that were being shipped out ended up fighting in the American Revolution. I'm going to show you that in a second. But this is the article where Ben Franklin is talking about the observation of mankind. And I think I read this several times before, but right here on line item 24 on this, and you can find this again online. Just Google Ben Franklin observation of mankind. And this is in 1751. And that Jacobite transportation was occurring in 1745. So this is the same time frame. And he's concerned about, who's actually having children, at what rate they're having children at, and how can this white, I don't even know how to say this, but anyway, let me just read this. It was just all about how they were going to take over and control, right? So, number 24, which leads me to add one remark that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionately small. All of Africa is black or tawny. Asia, chiefly tawny. So tawny means brown, by the way. So, and when you see swarthy, swarthy, it means black for the most part. So you'll see the terminology that was being used back in the 1700s. You'll see swarthy and tawny a lot. So America, exclusive of newcomers, wholly so. So America is black and tawny, exclusive of all newcomers, because a little bit of everybody was coming in. So in the 1600s, for the most part, you had King James and their bloodlines, all the investors who were putting up their money, because it was the Virginia Company of London that actually set it up. And we're going to look over that in a second as well. We'll come back to that one. But once again, so America, exclusive of newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italian, French, Russians, Swedes are generally all of what we call swarthy complexion. So he's not even saying brown or tawny. So in the 1700s, you still have a lot of remnants of the Moorish Empire, where these black people were all over Europe. And this is something that people don't like to talk about. And they were actually holding seats of power as well. And I'm going to show you some crests and so forth that validate that. As are the Germans, also Saxons, only accepted. Hold on one second. Let's go back. I'm talking too much here. The Italians, French, Russians, Swedes are generally what we call swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also. The Saxons only, accepted with the English, who make up the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. I could wish their numbers would increase. And while we are, as I may call it, scouring the planet by clearing America of the woods, you guys could take that for what it's worth. Woods are brown. And so making this side of the globe reflect brighter light to the eyes of the inhabitants of Mars and Venus. Why should we, in the sight of superior beings, darken its people? So this is some white supremacist stuff right here. So he's calling them superior, even though Moors had just ruled Europe longer than the Roman Empire, Greece, and once again, America, started 1776, and the way it's looking right now with our upcoming election, we're at the end of this thing already. Why increase the sons of Africa by painting them in America? And see, they refer to any black person as Africa or African at that time. That's another story. We'll have to dig into that one day in detail so it makes sense. Anybody with the same paint job, they called them African, whether you were in Australia or coming from Australia, coming from Africa, Europe, if you're coming from the Polynesian Islands, etc., or the West Indian Islands. Okay, sons of Africa by painting them or planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all Black Centanies from increasing the lovely white and red. But perhaps I'm partial to the complexion of my country for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. So he's basically saying here that we shouldn't import any more blacks or browns. And you can see how this stuff plays out, this mindset, how it plays out in immigration. So when the numbers start to switch up, you import people in, and regardless of their tint or their paint job, you could put them under a status if you have, say, a caste system. And you label some people black, you label other people white. And so when people check out these boxes, whether it's to get loans or what have you, it plays a role in this society. And that's something we all, if we're honest with ourselves, we really need to change. All right. So, and once again, how did a lot of these Black people come into power or were in all these different nations in Europe, right? So if you look at a lot of these Moorish crests, so a lot of people want to tell you, well, the Moors were everything other than Black people. But when you start looking at these crests to tell you a totally different story. And even some of the so-called white or Caucasian people here in America, when they do their family crest, they'll start to see that their family crest may have a head with a Black person on it. And I had one of my coworkers one day, we were talking about it, and there was one on their family crest, and he was telling me how one of his ancestors, they had conquered the Moors, and he chopped his head off, so they put his head on their family crest. But I'm like, well, is that why all these heads are on the family crest? And he just kind of chuckled and laughed because he knew that that wasn't true. But we had amazing conversations after that because I think a lot of people know the truth, but once again, it's a crime of omission for commission because you have a group of people running around who don't know who they are, don't know where they came from, and through the school systems have been told they're from somewhere else. And the scary part is that people are running around with master's degrees in history. And if the history is tainted and it's skewed, just like AI right now, if all the information out there is, I'm not going to say all the information, but the majority of it is false, right? If it's false with AI, it's just going to go out there. It's just Google on steroids. It's going to go out and grab a whole bunch of false information as well. So that's what makes it dangerous if you're going to use that information to help it to police a people or to regulate humanity. So let's jump back into something here. Like I was showing you here, whence the Black Irish of Jamaica, because a lot of these Scotch Irish were sent to Jamaica as well. And you could go there, they even have Irish town set up, and nobody celebrates St. Patrick Day like Jamaicans. They have great festivals. You can go to YouTube, watch some of that, and you have a lot of them who know that they have these Irish roots and also connected to England. That's why you see a lot of them. They'll go back to England, then also up to Canada. And one of the things you need to do is look at a map and geographically speaking, where the Isles of Scotland and so forth are located, and the way the gyres are in the Atlantic Ocean, it's like a straight shot straight over from there up into Canada and to to come down the East Coast. And also, when you look, you'll see that Africa is not that far of a ride to Brazil. And then there's another main gyre that is located down in that region. So nobody took a boat ride coming directly from Africa to the East Coast of America. Totally impossible. Everybody on the ship would die. But you have these currents that a sailboat, even if no one was steering it, it would automatically go from the West Coast of Africa into Brazil. So that's why you'll see a lot of the Africans that did get shipped to, say, the Americas, went to Brazil and went to the islands. They ended up in places like Haiti and into Montserrat, into those particular areas in Barbados. So there was a mixture of Scotch Irish and also a mixture of Africans, but the Africans came later. But slave trade started off with Scotch Irish. So that's where the majority of these Black people come from. This is where the confusion comes from. Less than 5% of those slaves that came from Africa even came to North America. They went to Brazil. All right. So this is Neophyte Dag, who is actually from the islands, and he's going to give his take on the King James bloodline. He starts to talk about his son, King Charles.
King Charles, who was King Charles the First, he's King of England, Scotland, France, Wales during the years of 1625 to 1649. He is the son of King James the First of England, the sixth of Scotland. There are a few facts about King Charles the First. His last name is Stuart, and he's of the Stuart clan. He lived in Scotland. He was born in Scotland, and then he became King of England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and he moved over to England. He founded and established what is now the states of Massachusetts and Maryland in the United States. He founded those states during the colonial time when they were being ruled by the King of England. He was the King of England at that time. He gave the charters to form those two states. He founded and established in the Caribbean, Barbados, Montserrat, Antigua, St. Kitts, and Bahamas. He's the one who founded them and established them. He gave the charter as well for the English colonies to be set up on those islands, the first English colonies. The US state North Carolina and South Carolina was named after him. Charles in Latin is Carolus, North Carolina, South Carolina. King Charles, here's the tragic part of it now, he was dethroned, removed from the throne of England and beheaded. His head was chopped off by Oliver Cromwell. His father, as we had covered, is King James I of Ireland, England, Scotland, France, and Wales, was Black. We already covered that in another message, but we'll repeat it here. His mother, Queen Anne of Denmark and Norway, she was also Black. We covered that in another message. And his wife, Queen Henrietta Marie of France, was also Black. So we'll get into this. The Stuart family, they're originally from Scotland. And you look at the Scotland map by clan name, and you'll see Stuart all over it. You'll also see other names. All these names are names of Black people that occupied the entire Scottish Isle and island during that time. They were all moved out, and they're now in the Caribbean. They're now in the US. But they were in Scotland at that time. These are their names. So if you look in any phone book, any list of names, you'll see this name scattered all over the US and the Caribbean. They were originally of Scottish ancestry. But this is where King James Stuart, King Charles Stuart, came from. This is King Charles' father, King James the Sixth and First Stuart. That's their last name. This is what he looks like. That's a portrait of him. That's currently in the National Portrait Gallery of the UK. It's a black person. You look at the person, it's unmistakably, he's a dark skinned, a black man. But I want to make you know the image so when you see it, you can recognize it versus all the pale skin, fair skin images that are being thrown around on the internet of King James. This is another image of King James, which King James had put in his book. This is a book of King James, the works of the Most High and Mighty Prince James, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France, Ireland, and defender of the faith. King James had published his own book. He put an image of himself in that book. This is an image of a black person, unmistakable. This is King James and what he looked like. This is a book that we'll cover that talks about all the Stuart. This is a general description of all the Stuarts. It's written by Alan Nassig. It's called The Royal Stuarts. And on page 114, it says, it's describing a person. He looked like a Stuart king. And what a Stuart king looked like? Tall and dark skin complexion person. That's what a Stuart king is. So this will settle all dispute on every Stuart line of king that.
I'm gonna pause there for a quick second. We're gonna come right back to this. But these Stuart kings were tall, right? And if you look, like once again, Robert the Bruce, Kenneth McDubb, like all of these going all the way back to, I think it was somewhere like around 900 AD and coming forward, they were all black kings. But when you study the history, a lot of them had come into that particular area during different wars, especially the Bruces, like during the Normandy Wars in France around 1099. You'll see a lot of them came from there in there. And like those, the shorter people that we've seen on the Jacobite transportation list, they would have been more of the ones who had settled there a lot longer before even the Stuart kings and the Bruces and so forth arrived in Scotland.
They had to be dark and they had to have this feature of a Stuart king. King Charles' mother, Queen Anne of Denmark, will go to this book. It's called Anne of Denmark by Ethel Carlton Williams. And on page 21, it says Anne, with her ivory complexion. And at first glance, you'll say, wow, ivory, that means white. That's the way it's been told to me. No, ivory is also black. If you go to the Webster Dictionary, look at the bottom of the right-hand portion of your screen, ivory black, fine kind of soft blackening. So ivory is black, but they put ivory complexion to throw you off. This is a portrait of Queen Anne of Denmark. And as you look, you can see the portrait is of a black woman. It's also in the National Portrait Gallery of the United Kingdom. So this is known. It's nothing new that I'm telling you, but the painted over images are thrown at you to deceive your eyes unless you go into the books and study to show yourself approved to know truth. But that's Queen Anne of Denmark. We'll go to King Charles now and prove who he is. His mother is black, his father is black, so obviously without a doubt he's black, but I want to prove it to you now in writing. So when you see these strange images of King Charles I being Caucasian, being of a pale and fair skin complexion, you know it's utter lie. So we'll look at a book called The Royal Passion, the turbulent marriage of King Charles I of England and Henrietta Maria of France. It's written by Katie Whitaker. On 204, it talks about King Charles as a boy. The boy was what people hoped another black prince. That's Prince Charles when he was young at the time. He wasn't king as yet. So the people were hoping they would have another black prince. His father was black. So they're hoping the son, who is black, is going to be now a valiant black prince. We'll go to another book, Commentary of the Life and the Reign of Charles I. And this is written by Isaac D'Israel. We'll look at page 417, and it talks about Charles I was of a middle stature, his complexion brown. So again, it verifies that he's a black person. In our modern day, a brown-skinned person is a black person. They're all lumped into one. Go to another book, King Charles I, a study by Walter Phelps Dodge. And in this book, on page 28, it talks about King Charles I. Charles, dark coloring, his dark coloring. It's not his hair, telling you his hair is of chestnut, and his dark coloring. It's talking about his skin complexion. Unmistakably, King Charles I was a dark-skinned person, which in our modern day time was a black person. We'll look at another book talking about King Charles I, and this is the book by the name of King Charles I by Pansy Pakenham. And on page 142 of this book, it's talking now about a rhyme, a poem that was written by one of King Charles' close friend after King Charles was killed by Oliver Cromwell. This friend, Harrington, was reminiscent of King Charles I, so he wrote a poem which expressed the rhyme. As I was going by Charing Cross, I saw a black rider on a black horse. They told me it was King Charles I, a black rider, King Charles. So in every indication, the people, his friends, are indicating that he's black. And in the books, it's written that he's of dark skin complexion. King Charles was black. He has no other color to be. His mother was black, his father was black. So King Charles I is obviously going to be black. Which brings us to his wife, Queen Henrietta Marie of France. We'll go to a book called The Royal Martyr by Charles Villiers Coit. And on page 43 of that book, Princess Henrietta Maria. The princess, who had been born in 1609, was then in her 14th year, dark of complexion. So Henrietta Maria was dark. We'll go to another book, Trial of King Charles I by J.G. Muddiman. We'll read from page 8 of this book. However, when he had seen the queen, he wrote this of her lovely and lasting complexion, a dark brown. Just telling you her complexion is dark brown. Unmistakably, Queen Henrietta Maria of France was dark skinned in what we call in our modern day a black woman. Which brings us to this conclusion. King Charles I of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales was unmistakably a black man. King James's father was a black man. We've covered that. Queen Anne's mother was a black woman. We've covered that in previous message. His wife, Queen Consort Henrietta Marie of France, was black. Yes, there were black people in France. And she came from a king and queen line of France. So the king of France at that time was also black. Spoiler alert that I want to bring forth at this particular point in time. The person who ordered the dethroning of King Charles I and the execution of King Charles I, Oliver Cromwell, was a black man. He was also black. We'll cover that in a later message. which brings us back to testament.
All right. Once again, that's Neophyte Dag, and he has some great material on there. And he has one specifically on King James. That was the one where he was tying in King Charles, who was his son. And we went over this on my Denzel Washington podcast, but I'm gonna touch this one again. This book is Memoirs of the Secret Services of John Mackey. So this guy was a Secret Serviceman during the reign of King William, Queen Anne, and King George. And he was going out spying on these Jacobites or these Scottish royals. Here, I'm going to read this part for you again. And once again, this character right here is it's not an F. It's an F without the crossbar, was used for silent S's. Was it silent or hard S's? One of the two. All right. So the true secret history of the rise and promotions of the English Scots nobility. So that's officers, civil, military, naval, and other persons of distinction from the revolution. So he's spying on these royals and all these people of high office for the king and the queen. And here's some of the things that he came up with. So let's go to page 39. So we already, heard about King James and King Charles, right? So they're black. So right here, George Fitzroy, Duke. Here, let me open this up here. There we go. So that's 38. Let's go down to 39. George Fitzroy, Duke of Northumberland, is the son of King Charles II. So remember, King James the First of England, King James VI of Scotland, same person. His son was King Charles, who we just learned about. King Charles the First's son is King Charles II. So George Fitzroy is the Duke of Northumberland, is the son of King Charles II. All right, you guys with me? By the Duchess of Cleveland. Was one of the captains of the King James Horse Guards, which he quitted at the Revolution. It goes on. And so this guy, John Mackey, is describing these people, and he's telling, their character, what they look like, all of that, right? So he says he's a black man of honor, in paying his debt and living well with his neighbors in the country, does not much care for conversation of men of quality or business. So he wasn't bougie at all. He's a tall black man like his father the king. So once again, King Charles II, he's saying he's a tall man, he's a tall black man like his father, King Charles II, and he's about 40 years old. Excuse me. All right. And so right here, they're talking about Charles, the Duke of St. Albans. He's the son of King Charles II as well, by Miss Gwyn. So these guys are doing a lot of baby making. And he was made king by King William of the bedchamber of captain of the band of prisoners. No, pensioners, excuse me. And sent by the King of France to congratulate the marriage of the Duke of Burgundy. So you go down here, he's a gentleman, very Wade de Bon natural, like he's a natural gentleman, well bred, doth not love business, so he doesn't love business either, is well affected. So it sounded like these were a bunch of, what do you call them, like these young kids today, like if their parents do a good job raising them, taking care of them, keeping them out of harm's way, they start to feel entitled. So these guys didn't care too much about business or carrying conversation with the elite. It says that it's well affected to the constitution of his country. He is of a black complexion. So once again, they're not talking about their hair color, they're talking about their skin complexion. He is of a black complexion, because I keep hearing all these people when they talk about black Irish, black Dutch, black this. Oh, it just meant that their hair and their eyes were black. No, man, come on. Come on, we got to be real and cut out all the BS, man. You know, the majority of people on the planet Earth have dark hair, dark eyes. So why would they describe them by that? And it clearly states, and this book was written in 1733, before all the racism and everything else came into play. So whether they were pitch black, Scots, light skinned, biracial, um, pale skin, or what have you, they referred to themselves as Irish or Scot. They didn't go by all that silly stuff back then. Those things are new social, political, and now economical constructs that created this racist vibe that we live in. And if we don't watch it, it's going to blow up in everybody's face. And we could start all over like cavemen and see how everybody likes that. So we're going to have to learn how to get along, y'all. Once again, he's of a black complexion, not too tall. So he wasn't tall like his grandparents. I think his father or his grandfather, Charles I. A couple of those right. Some said he was middle stature. One said he was tall. So, all right. So let's go down here. Charles Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, is the grandson of King Charles II, son of the heirs of Bennett and Earl of Arlington. And so once again, if you are doing your genealogy and you're from Virginia and you start seeing on there and it says that they're white and the last name Stewart. So once again, King James' last name was Stewart. And you may see it spelled Stuart or it's Stewart, same people. Especially it'll start to tell you that, they're of that bloodline. You'll start to see family crest and so forth, right? And how do I know? Because that Stewart bloodline's on my tree, coming off my Bruce bloodline. All right. So once again, this is the grandson of King Charles II. And once again, I like to read their personalities too. It's pretty interesting. Is a very pretty gentleman, hath abroad in the world, zealous in his constitution and in his country. So they love their country. Tall black man, 25 years old. So once again, this guy is spying on these royals and he's going back reporting to the throne. And this is how they actually conquered him, so today we still have intel programs that are used to capture the so-called enemy. But unfortunately, in our case here in this society, when you have a multicultural, multiracial society, one man's hero is going to be another man's terrorist. And that's unfortunate. All right. So one more thing I wanted to go over here before I let you guys go. This book right here, Virginia Colonial Soldiers, is an excellent book. I don't think you could actually find the entire book on PDF online. So I actually purchased this book, and there's very good information in it. Once again, I talked about George Washington in my Denzel Washington video. You guys should check that one out. His bloodline actually goes to George Washington's brother, John Washington. But in this one here, I just want to show you guys who was fighting during the time of the American Revolution. Who were these people? And you could even go to see where people say, yeah, the slaves fought in the war and all this other stuff. But once again, when you go looking into these wars, like King George War, French and Indian War, you know, it's like you start looking at these firsthand accounts of the people who had boots on the ground, who sitting there looking at these people who are fighting and dying in these wars. And then you start looking at your family information, right? You start looking at your family genealogy, you'll start to see that your ancestors fought, died, and bled to make this country what it is. And it's just a shame that we're in the boat that we're in now. But a lot of it is because people don't understand what happened. They don't understand what happened, when it happened, and how it happened. And a lot of that information's coming out. We're living in the age of Aquarius, for one, which is Armageddon or the Great Revealing. So that's why you see so much information's coming out that was once hidden, right? They say that information took all the way up to the 1900s to double. And from the 1900s to 2000 took another 100 years to double. And then from 2000 to 2020 to double. So those 20 years. Now information is doubling every 72 days. And with AI, it's going to be even quicker. So now that was things that would have taken years, because I know I started a long time ago, like 20 years ago, I started doing genealogy. It was just so difficult to find the time to go to the library and start digging through files. And now with the with the click of a finger on a smartphone, or even checking into online, you could find this information, right? So look at this. King George, excuse me, King George, that's what they probably called him back then. George Washington, right? 1757, during the French and Indian War. These were the guys that he was leading. These were the guys fighting side by side with him. And you could see, once again, they give their size, height. I know we're getting at the end. My throat's drying out. I'm sitting here drinking tea, but we're gonna get through this real quick. Give me another 5 minutes. We're gonna bring this one home. So you see, the majority of the people that was side by side with him were fellow Virginians, right? And most of these people are descendant from those same bloodlines, right? And you'll start to see if they're from Virginia, these counties. When I do genealogy, I see certain counties showing up a lot, right? Ones where there were a lot of indigenous American people who were already here that were intermarrying with these Scottish people who were coming in, and they formed allegiances. And that's going to be another story. And then you had some of the indigenous tribes who didn't, they sided with different Europeans who came over at different times, and that created a lot of internal conflict as well. But let's look at this. These are the people fighting on the side of George Washington. And you'll see the same thing, dark complexion, fair, freckle, ruddy complexion, ruddy, and I'm not going to even go over what ruddy means, but that's one of those things that people could run with. It's kind of vague, so that could go either way. But you'll see fair complexion, dark complexion. But one of the things you'll start to see is a lot of these dark complexions and brown, you'll see they're from Ireland. Same people. And some of these names are some of the names of the people that were getting off the ships during the Jacobite rebellions, being shipped into the 13 colonies, shipped into Virginia. So you can see that, right? Planter from Scotland. And you can see the names, those Irish names. And you can see a lot of the ones who were from Virginia, like this guy, Darby. He was a planter. So these guys, weren't slaves. These were people who were fighting to protect their interests, their wealth. But you had others who were shipped over here as rebels, and they were sent as indentured servants. And in some cases, they were able to join the military, fight, get their freedom, get land, and they did it. So and there were blacks, white, etc. A lot of people, what they don't tell the truth about is slavery didn't exist in every state. It wasn't everywhere. There are a lot of states that didn't have slavery. I recommend that you Google, start reading books to find out where it was, find out when it started in what states. You'll hear all this stuff about, oh, we weren't allowed to read and write and all that. That happened for a short period of time in certain states. That wasn't everywhere. Because at the same time, you can see that there were many inventions that Black people and people of color made in this society. A lot of the patents, the street lights and elevators and all these other things. So a large number of the inventions were made by these Black people who were already here in Americas. And it was during a time in which they're saying they didn't read or write, or shortly after a period where they began to read and write. And there's just no way that it happened that quick. But you had thousands upon thousands of free Black people in this country. And some of them actually owned slaves or say indentured servants. And in some cases, there were white people on plantations owned by Black people. Another one of those big secrets they want to hide. Everybody got some of that smoke. But just taking a look at this once again, you'll see that there were a lot of Black, brown people who fought in the American Revolution, and we don't get these stories. And a lot of them, like here's one from England, John Bridges. And this is another book. If you're into genealogy, I recommend that you get this book because a large number of people are going to have ancestors that came from Virginia. In Virginia, by the time you get done looking at it, Virginia was like England or Scotland. It was a colony of England and Scotland. So there's one more thing here. Let's see. So we keep talking about King James and the 13 colonies, right? So of the 13 states in the US that were part of it, Virginia was the first. And you can see right here, the Virginia Company of London was a joint stock company, the King James Charter, right? All right. And this is what people who are fighting for reparations, this stuff you really got to understand, right? Because the United States didn't become the United States until they claimed what, 1776, right? So what was going on prior to that? All right. And in that reparations question, you never hear anybody talk about the Virginia Company or the Royal African Company, the Dutch East African Company, and then ultimately you end up with the U.S. company or corporation. And not sure if you guys heard me. It started off with the Virginia Company of London. All right. And what was their goal, right? To make a profit for its shareholders, colonize and establish the English colony in the New World. They named the coast of Virginia after Queen Elizabeth. And you remember in Neophyte Dag's video, he mentioned that Carolina was named after King Charles, right? And then Jamestown, Virginia was named after who? King James. All right. So you hear these stories that, the first slaves were brought into to Jamestown, all this other stuff. You hear a lot of these stories. There's a lot more to these stories than what they're telling. Some of them aren't even true. They say that, you know, there was like, I can't remember how many people they said was on the ship, like 19 slaves that were brought in, or African slaves. But when you read it in the Spanish version, it never mentions they were from Africa. It said Negroes. So once again, that's the hijack where they twist the story and twist the narrative. So once again, when the Virginia Company of London was established, all right, the company's actions included raising money. The company raised money by selling stock to the public, asking wealthy people to donate, hosting lotteries, sending ships. In December 1606, the company sent 3 ships, Susan Constant, Godspeed, Discovery, to Virginia. And see, this was well documented because there was money being made, right? King James signed the charter for Virginia. He set up governors, etc. And those are the people that we get. They give us these other faces. They don't tell you about King James, right? And establishing Jamestown on May the 13th, 1607, the first settlers chose Jamestown Island as the site for their fort. Granting charters, the crown granted the company 2 more charters over the next 18 years, which reformed its financial model and democratized its governance. The Virginia Company of London failed due to a number of factors, and this is important. Running out of money, the company was not making enough money. So, of course, they were making money by uh, tobacco sales, like looking for gold, etc. And the Powhatan uprising. So this is King Powhatan, who is actually Pocahontas's father. And these names are names that were made up by the English. So these aren't their real indigenous names. You could actually Google that to get those names because I can't even pronounce them if I was looking at it. The company faced challenges from Powhatan's people. So Chief Powhatan, he was over many of the tribes on the East Coast, not just in the Virginia area, all the way up into the Carolinas. Indian Massacre of 1622 massacred and killed hundreds of settlers. 1624, the king revoked the company's charter and made the Virginia Royal Colony. So that's when Virginia got its name, and all this stuff was done through King James. So when we hear King James, who wrote the Bible, I think they kind of demonize him by saying he was a homosexual, he killed his mother, and all this other stuff. But when you read the story, I don't even think he got a chance to spend that much time with his mother because his mother was jailed, I think, when he was 1, in reference to the death of his father. So that story, the stories don't even add up. Like when you really delve into the historic aspects of it, that story didn't make any sense. He had 3 children. So the story doesn't add up. I'll just say that. But I think a lot of that came from him poking jabs at the Pope. He had a beef with the Pope. And it's really hard to tell whether or not he himself was, whether he was a Protestant or a Catholic. Some people say that he was a Hebrew and he just practiced the faith. A lot of times you had people who were really one thing but practiced something else in public versus private. So down here, the Virginia Company, and this is a good read. I'm not going to read all this, but Jamestown Rediscovery talks about some of the things. England was relatively a poor nation in the 1500s, with a ruler willing to send privateers against the colonial powers. So basically, what was happening, why they even started coming and trying to set up these 13 colonies, is because Spain had become so wealthy, right, during the Moorish Empire. And they were coming back and forth to the Americas and Brazil and so forth. They gold, You know, they were colonizing like Puerto Rico, which is rich port. You hear stories of dealing with the Florida Keys, how they had set up castles and so forth down there where they were hiding a lot of the gold and wealth that they were getting from the islands in different parts of America. And England needed to compete. They needed to compete. They seen Spain come into power, and they came and set up the 13 colonies. And here, there's something of importance in here that I read that we need to cover here. So it was basically here. Let me just go ahead and read this. England was a relatively poor nation in the late 1500s, with the ruler willing to send his privateers against other colonial powers, but unwilling to risk public moneys on the standing English colony. Queen Elizabeth I gave a blessing to Sir Walter Raleigh's personal funding of the Roanoke colony, but failed. Roanoke's in Virginia. The answer was a joint stock venture, an early version of today's corporations. It was a corporation, y'all. Wealthy London gentlemen would buy a share in the Virginia company, thus giving the capital monies to start the supply and supply a colony that they hoped the colony would return profit to them. King James I granted the Virginia Company a royal charter for its colonial pursuit in 1606. The company had the power to appoint a council of leaders in the colony, a governor, and other officials. It took the responsibility to continually provide settlers supplies and ships for the venture. The company's plan was to identify profitable raw materials such as gold and silver in Virginia to repay investors back in England. The first settlers included artisans, craftsmen, and laborers alongside of gentlemen leaders. The initial public reaction to the company was favorable, but as the mortality rate at Jamestown rose, meaning deaths, rose, the prospects for profit grew dim. So the Indians were kicking that butt. So it grew dim. Financial support for it waned. The leadership restored to lotteries and went so far to attempt silkworm production at Jamestown. As the industries failed, promoters of the company argued that converting Virginia Indians to Christianity was a worthy goal for the venture. I'm going to repeat that part right there. So what was happening is with them coming in and trying to expand their colony, you know, the Indians were cool with them as long as they stayed over on that side of the hills or whatever. And they started bringing more people and trying to get more land, getting greedy, start going to war with the Indians. And this is what the Spanish did early on in the 1500s and were getting their butt kicked. And that's why they ended up going to, you know, like Puerto Rico and other islands to Mexico. But here in Virginia, you know, they were trying to do their thing and keep up with the Spaniards. And as the industries failed, they said the promoters of the company argued that converting the Virginia Indians to Christianity was a worthy goal for the venture. So starting right here is where they began to use religion as a tool. Tobacco cultivation finally provided a profitable return, but it came too little too late to save the Virginia Company. After the Indian Massacre of 1622 killed hundreds of settlers, the king revoked the company's charter, and in 1624, it made Virginia Royal Company under his control. All right, so archaeological excavations at Jamesport have shown how closely the colony followed the company's directives and instructions in late 1606 from the Virginia Company, stressed above all things the need to hide the number of English sick and deceased to prevent the Virginia Indians from seizing upon the colony's weakness. All right, archaeologists uncovered a large English burial ground inside the crowded confines of the fort's wall. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. This is why the Virginia Company or the London Virginia or the London Company of Virginia initially failed, and that's where they start coming up with other companies that came after this. But this is the beginning of Virginia in the 13 colonies. And from there, like King James kicked off Virginia in 1607, Massachusetts 1620, New Hampshire 1623, and then come his son King Charles the First, King Charles the Second, and you have New York coming in 1625, a second charter at 1664, Maryland in 1632, Connecticut 1636, Rhode Island 1636, Delaware 1638, North Carolina 1663, New Jersey 1664, South Carolina 1664, Pennsylvania, which is the 12th, 1681, and the 13th. So all those I just mentioned, the first 12 were King James, his son King Charles I, grandson King Charles II. That accounts for the first 12. And the 13th is when their relatives, um, King George first, second, and third, that's where Georgia comes into play. And that was in 1732. All right. So prior to that, you would not have had slaves or slavery in Georgia prior to 1732. So there's a lot more that we need to know about history. And we weren't taught this in school. We weren't really taught who King James was. And many of you Bible scholars, I would like to hear from you. How many of you learned this in seminary? Did they tell you who King James was? Did they tell you how Christianity came into the colonies? You know, and there's more to it than what I read just there, but you could see that they were trying to soften the Indians up for the most part, because the Indians were a very proud people, and what we know and who we think the Indians are is a totally different story as well. Because America was a thriving country way before the English came. And there were some English who were trading way before most of the stories that we already know. And I'm not convinced that some of these early American Indians who were very advanced didn't travel around and set up colonies in Europe and in other parts of the world. But that's going to be a story for another day. So once again, this here was dealing with the King James bloodline and how it connects to America in the 13 colonies, like how it's really a very important part of our history. And it wasn't told in the, it definitely wasn't told in the public school system. I'm not sure some of these private schools and some of your Harvards and Yales, I'm sure there's some truth being told to people who are being groomed to be leaders, because somebody needs to know this, right? Can't tell a lie unless you know the truth. So once again, my name is Russell Bruce, Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. And until next time, peace.